we have traditionally this, like, it's 90% design the technology to fit human capabilities and limitations, and 10% is improve human capability through training. And unfortunately, it's been the other way around, you know.
The physical security space, often when you make things too complicated, like there's some keys that also have like RFID in them. So there's like a physical aspect and the RFID aspect. I've seen those fail over and over.
Make security, if you can make it a routine and people can do it without thinking automatically, without thinking about it, then it's not a burden, it's not distracting.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today we have with us a very special guest joining us. I'm honored to welcome Professor Angela Sasse. Angela is a true pioneer in the realm of human-centric security, with her work focusing on the often overlooked relationships between usability and security. She comes from a background in psychology, and she founded the UK Research Institute in Science and Cybersecurity, where she helps drive critical research in this field. Angela also serves as the professor of human-centered technology in the Department of Computer Science at the University of College London, really a testament to her groundbreaking work. Angela's research has always emphasized the importance of making security usable, and her work continues to shape the landscape of the cybersecurity world. Angela, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Erica.
Yeah. Could we start by actually hearing just more about your journey? It sounds like you have a very interesting path that you took, starting with psychology and then going to computer science and security. I'd love to hear more about it.
I was really, towards the end of my psychology degree, I used computers. You know, we're obviously going back a long time now, and we're talking about the mid 80s, late 80s. And I started to ask myself why it was so hard to learn how to use them. And I then chose to do a master's project on it, trying to train people to use software. And by the end of it, I concluded that it wasn't the people that needed fixing. It was that, it simply wasn't designed for them. I think sort of more intuitively than anything else, I realized that sitting in the psychology department and complaining about the stuff not fitting, the needs of the intended users very well, that it would be better to go into a computer science department and work with the people who think this stuff up and design it, build it, and help them as I saw it. To make it be more appropriate and more fitting for the users, and that's what I did. And UCL was very. I joined UCL in 1990, so I did my PhD first in computer science, and then joined UCL in 1990, and started teaching human-computer interaction there, and spent really the first decade mostly looking at the new emerging internet systems, the usability issues there, including all the stuff we're using right now in this interview. Yeah. Zoom, I worked on audio and internet audio and video. It was really, it's really a very exciting time. And it was really by chance I came across security in that, because if you're in multimedia computing and multimedia conferencing and so on, you work a lot. We collaborated a lot with telecoms companies, and one of them asked me, almost as an aside, somebody said, "Could you come and have a look why these?" And I'll never forget this. So it's like it's still imprinted in my brain. We're talking the late 90s here. And said, could you come and have a look why these stupid users can't remember their passwords?" And with a master student at the time, who also then did a PhD with me, Anne Adams, we started a study, and it really was it's one of those moments where you suddenly go like, wow. I'd gotten so used to that really almost everybody in computing and in the industry started to realize that usability was was very important if you wanted your products being used, and in security, really, I realized at that point, nobody cared, not only that nobody cared about usability, but that they thought it was actively anti-security to make security easy.
And that thought still exists today. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's one of those very, I call it it's a fake trade-off, the usability security trade-off.
Yeah.
And it was through that study that I realized, how really, and then there's two important things. So first of all, is the answer to the question, was the users weren't stupid. They were just given a set of tasks that were impossible to achieve. You needed to be a memory athlete to cope with the number of passwords and the various policy. But those people all had a job to do. So, and I think it's still, after all those years, it's still a really difficult message to get through to some people who make decisions about security.
Yeah, it's interesting having the conversation with people who still think, oh, there needs to be a trade-off. We can't focus too much on usability because then we'll sacrifice security. Can you give some interesting examples from your research of how usability enhanced security once you were able to figure that out?
So sticking with the passwords as an example, it really led to, over the years, finally, the insight came more and more that people just couldn't remember those passwords, and that they started to realize and to accept that what we were saying in the paper, that people would just try and improve the memorability of the passwords that we're dealing with by using the same passwords for everything. And that in itself was a much higher security risk. And as the development has gone over the years, at the time they were just really focused on brute force attacks on password files. But that now is just a very, very small subclass of the types of attacks that we're worrying about. And the social engineering attacks and this are just, and they're using the same password for everything is a much, much bigger risk. And the fact that we've made it easier for users to be secure, for instance, through password managers, some companies are also using passwordless solutions and really taking on all the work involved in identifying or authenticating the legitimate users. That's really been very important, and I mean, not least even the standards bodies that set some of the rules high up have changed their recommendation.
It's an uphill battle.
It's an uphill battle. It's taken a very long time, but now, they're advising, don't expire passwords, don't rely on complexity, move away from single factor, from single knowledge-based authentication, and exactly all those things. And they have clearly, multi-factor authentication, password managers and so on have improved security.
What are some areas of research that you're focused on now, areas that you see that need a lot of improvement still with usability and security?
Yes. So one of the things that has concerned me is that the focus of a lot of usable security research has really been on somehow training or persuading users to behave securely. And that actually undermines the original idea of which is if you want to summarize it in one sentence, is make it easy for users to do the secure thing, and it's an insight that we have in security, but it's also more broadly developed in the whole behavioral economics community, where somebody like Richard Thaler, who with Cass Sunstein wrote the Nudge book. And if they say, they're pretty exasperated. And I think security, that people have been misusing that concept as a way of, they think they can use it to make people do what they want them to do. And you go no. First and foremost, it's got to be easy enough. And that's still an uphill battle that isn't being done, and instead we're trying to sort of like nudge or persuade or cajole people into behaviors that are, at the end of the day, if, they're too effortful, they cost too much time, and effort. And that is not just because individuals aren't prepared to do it. It's because the damage, that the productivity sacrifice that would result from following those security rules. I mean, it would, I think for many companies, it would be a bigger threat than the IT security threat they have to deal with, right?
Yeah. As an example, in the physical security space, often when you make things too complicated, like there's some keys that also have like RFID in them. So there's like a physical aspect and the RFID aspect. And I've seen those fail over and over. And often what people will do is just like prop the door open. And so then you're not using any security. So in your opinion, like what are some of the best ways to avoid inconveniences, even when they try to make it more usable, but then fail to do so? Does it really start at the beginning ideation phases with the engineers? How do you educate the engineers to make the right decisions? Do users need to be involved from the very beginning?
Well, the short answer to that one is that is ideal. But that doesn't mean that you can also improve solutions that are already in place, and where there's a problem. You can do really both. Just carrying out a workload analysis and then speaking to somebody like the line managers who know the main job that these people, these employees have to perform, is often that's a very quick, and sensible thing. But that's not happening at the moment and I don't really want to just bash the security people here. I think a lot of it is just a failure, a communication and collaboration failure, is because when companies buy security, they themselves aren't asking this question of the suppliers, right? If they were said to their suppliers, and how much time and effort is that going to take from the employees who have to do this, then I think the security vendors would start to pay attention. Start to pay attention to it. Yeah, and it's that I think we often see this, because we do interviews with CISOs, but also with board members to a certain extent. And what we hear again and again is still that most companies aren't really intelligent customers when it comes to buying security, that they just go in there and say like, oh, I want this certification, or I want to be compliant with this. And just, what's the cheapest thing I can buy that will make me compliant with this?
Yeah, it's very true. Going back to physical security, we see that all the time. There's so many options out there, and not a lot of them even play well together. There's like interoperability problems. And so the end user is like very overwhelmed and trying to figure out what they need. And like you said, cost is like probably one of the biggest factors for them. And they're not necessarily educated enough about the security to make the right security and usability decisions. And so, it's a very complex network of trying to figure out how to educate the integrators and the end users. And it's a challenge for sure. It's one of the things that I'm passionate about in the access control world.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good example, and there's two kind of like levers we can operate. So one thing, first and foremost, you want to make it, it's really in any company's economic best interest to make it easy as little effort. Any secondary task that people have to do is you want to make it as little effort as possible to reduce the amount of distraction you have from the productive activity. And I think sometimes it's we're really trying to get also microeconomists involved in actually starting to cost some of the loss production, because it's at the moment the costs tend to be hidden, and once you start quantifying them, then I think it makes companies more like sit up and go like, okay, we should be clearer about how much time and effort we can expend. And I think I'm quite confident this is going to change now with the the shortage of skilled labor we have in many areas. really wasting the time of any skill ever you do have. That's, I think, is starting to really come home to people. So it's that, find something that fits, or basically invest in making it fit to not create unnecessary workload. Is number one. Number two is just to make security, if you can make it a routine and people can do it without thinking automatically, without thinking about it, then that's also, then it's not a burden, it's not distracting. And I think that is something that's completely ignored in this. There's a huge security awareness and training industry, right? And all they're doing is bombarding people with knowledge and expectations.
They make them take a certification class once a year.
Yeah, once a year. Nobody learns this way, and nobody changes behavior based on that type of approach, right? So that's really is going really back to like elementary things, that if you, in most human resources departments, there are people who know this, right? Some companies actually have really good training for other types of activities, and all they need to do is apply the same principles to the security awareness and training, instead of buying like the cheapest package off the shelf, and then hoping that, again, this fixes the problem.
This podcast is brought to you by Quantal Security. It's important noting how tech innovations like the ones pioneered by Quantal are actively reshaping the security landscape. At Quantal, our mission is to build software innovations that make systems more accessible and more secure. From leveraging quantum technology to integrating anomaly detection and immutable ledger systems, we're solving security problems in the realms of access control and beyond. If you want to learn more about Quantal, visit our website at quantalsecurity.com and reach out to us. What about so let's say for new products, have you done any research on how to build a system from the start, or a security product from the start that incorporates these principles of usability to make it easier for the end user and customer?
So it's partly my research, and that is just really doing a workload analysis up front. You're modeling the primary tasks that people are doing. You're asking the company to tell you where their highest value activities are, and the highest value activity, and then you model the primary task, you model the security task, and then you're trying to get the time it takes down. And the other thing you do is you're trying not to have the security task interrupt within a primary task. It's often much better put security either right at the beginning or put it right at the end, but don't let it interrupt the tasks in between. That's so that's why basically logging in once and then being able to do your task is much better than if you're in there and then it constantly basically, now I need to log into this and now I need to do that. And it's always that, small as that disruption might seem, it does actually cost time and effort, and also it wears people down, and it leads to security fatigue. That's actually been in the literature, been extremely well demonstrated. The other route to this is actually something a colleague of mine has pioneered. Her name is Professor Lizzie Coles-Kemp from Royal Holloway, University of London. And she's really pioneered these participatory methods. It's called inclusive security. And she's pioneered these methods for working with the employees themselves, with the end users themselves. And they're using there's a wonderful array of very low threshold methods, starting with Post-its, sketching, and going more sophisticated. We're now doing a lot using serious Lego a lot in this context for people to basically build, their task. And then we're seeing like how to fit the security in there. If you're not familiar with her work, I can highly recommend this. So that would be really, if you can construct something from scratch, that's one way of doing it. And we've also used it in companies actually to identify conflicts, and identify where actually the real obstacles are. So there are also some offerings already. I've seen this. There are some security awareness products, but they're not web-based. There's game-based methods, and there's some companies that offer, like, for trainers to go around and actually work with a whole department or groups of people on basically doing role playing, enacting, like, okay, so now I'm going on this business trip. I'm taking this bit and that bit, and I'm downloading this, right? And then so to do a more collective learning, which
more engaging.
It's more engaging, and it often helps, in my experience, also often then helps the security experts who should really be present at those things and should be watching, to identify when their policies don't actually fit the actual work that their employees are doing, and then through that dialogue, it's again, and it's a technique that's been pioneered by another colleague, Professor Debbie Ashenden from Australia, who developed this technique called security dialogues to help security experts work, because and that's also particularly that can really work with, you could use that with ordinary press, but also I think what a lot of people don't realize is it's not just the ordinary, maybe not terribly IT literate employees who are a problem, in the sense, or are seen to problem. It's also very technically literate users, like software developers, like systems administrators, who drive the security people, into despair because they are not following the guidance and things. And it's exactly the same story again. Why don't they do it? It's because they can't apply this, or it would take them too much time and effort to figure out how to implement what the security people want. And then also they're at the same time getting the signals from the top of the organization, that all that matters is, like, meeting the deadline with the functionality and within budget. Right. And that really security and usability, aren't, nobody ever explicitly asks for that from them.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about the future trends of research and really trying to incorporate the idea of human-centric security from the beginning, and those methods. I'm going to have to look into some of those researchers. That's really fascinating. So
another thing, if I can talk about another
go for it.
Research, we should really talk about this, and this is simulated phishing training. This is we've done several studies, and last year at the IEEE Security and Privacy Symposium, there was a really important paper from colleagues in Switzerland that had a longitudinal study looking at whether employees who were subjected to simulated phishing training really end up clicking less frequently than others. And the answer is no.
Right. That's what my guess would have been. But yeah, that's really interesting. How did they address, what were their suggestions for preventing phishing?
To really, first of all, like, get your defenses in the best possible, in the best possible situation to start with. Second is, like, is use technical mechanisms so you can flag the and it's really it's building on advice that also in the UK, for instance, the National Cybersecurity Centre give. It's like the first and most important step is cut down the number of possibly suspicious emails that end up in your user's mailbox. That is the single most effective thing you can do. So developing, keeping your filters up to date, developing. And that is something you can do all the better the more you actually have a good cooperation with your users, and they notify, that when something is suspicious, that they notify. And then again, make this a dialogue, report back and explain, why, okay, this stuff has come in today, this one is okay, and we've now, changed our filters, but this one is, and here's what they're trying to do and why. And actually it showed the engagement from the employees really changed very, very significantly. They actually were willing to put in time and effort to be part of a collaborative effort. Whereas if you just bombard, if they're sitting there and you're constantly now worrying whether, not only the real attackers are trying to phish you, but your employer is trying to do the same thing. Right. It's really bad for morale. And then people, we've seen this is in our study, people just start reporting everything just to be on the safe side, right?
Yeah. One time I heard this one example, somebody I knew who worked at a large facility, and their IT department sent out a suspicious email and put in a fake kind of like phishing link. And then it took them to a webpage that just said, gotcha. And it was basically like, hey, be more careful. It was supposed to be like a real world example of, and I remember her saying that people were so irritated about it, like, oh, they're like demeaning me. And it's interesting because, things like that you could see as being like maybe effective in some ways, but then it ended up offending people. So it's interesting to see where some of these dialogue things work and where maybe they don't. And I think I like what you said, that it should be collaborative and not a like gotcha moment type offensive on the offense, I guess.
And another simple, so if you're reducing the number of suspicious emails, another simple change you can make that is super effective is, so why do people end up clicking? It's because they are very focused on their primary tasks and they're working through their emails, they're responding. And if all the legitimate emails are clearly marked, then you can do that. And then my advice is put the ones that are potentially suspicious, but again, might be a new customer inquiry, or a new or an important a new contact that you haven't had with. Put those aside. Because if you're in the routine, in the very focused system one mode, you're just you're doing things automatically, and then it's very easy to make a mistake, because the attackers really design this stuff to be. But here again, it's also working with other techniques. So, for instance, if you have a password manager, then even if people click on a link, your employees click on it, it doesn't matter because it won't work, because the password manager will realize that the website is fake, and so really using the right combination. But also then if you're saying, okay, now I'm going to look at these emails that might not be legitimate, and then I can switch out of my routine mode and go into, okay, I'm looking at this with a different pair of glasses now, right? And this is what we call the system 2 mode, where you're really very consciously, first of all, going like and checking various indicators. And maybe even you're picking up the phone and calling, somebody to find. But you can't do that for all the emails you have to work through. If it's a small number, you can, then actually saying like, please, treat those with caution, or then, make a decision to report them, ask somebody else, and so on. As and most employees will happily do that.
Yeah. Security is, such a evolving landscape. It's like constantly changing. And especially with a lot of new technology popping up, AI, all of these new computational methods, what do you see as being the future for this kind of research? Where do you think there's going to be new threats popping up and new ways to educate people?
I think and one of the things we often find, one of the findings we have in our research is that where really education is needed is that people don't understand the threats, and they don't understand, things such as, I still, after 20 years, still hear this, like, I'm not rich or famous. Why would anyone bother to attack me, right? And you're going like, it doesn't matter. You're just a commodity. Your data is just a commodity. Using you, as a pawn, it's just, you're just a pawn in the attacker's game. They're not interested in you personally, and I think really I do think communicating better about how attacks work. And I also find it's like, if people start understanding that somebody's trying, they're being manipulated, somebody's trying to manipulate them, and that this is happening in many ways, if we're honest about it, it's not just attackers, it's also legitimate commercial companies manipulating you, right? And popping up, an offer or something right at the time when they think you're tired or frustrated and you're probably quite keen to just do something, and then offering you like, the 10% off or 20% off, make you buy stuff, and so on. And also, of course, keeping people engaged, basically diverting them from things that they might want to do, to the commercial interests of others and so on. I think once people start to understand that more, and really asserting, basically is what we call their digital sovereignty more, and maybe think about how they're structuring their working life, and their outside working life, and how you engage with the digital world, aware of that at the moment it is very easy to manipulate and distract you, and get you into various things. That if we're improving the literacy in that level and getting people to take charge of potentially also their own data. I think there's lots of good ideas around for self-sovereign identity. And I think users should also really be more free to choose which devices they want to use for different things, and service providers should just really support it, and not just insist on, if you don't use this latest product, with that type of browser, otherwise you can't have my service, I think really there's space for education there.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your research is really focused on making security more seamless for the end user so that it's more just second nature, and then also educating them. I love that it's like two sides of the coin.
Yeah. And I
really
think the tragedy with with the security industry is that they don't, in human factors, we have traditionally this, like, it's 90% design the technology to fit human capabilities and limitations, and 10% is improve human capability through training. And unfortunately, it's been the other way around, and been almost 90%, in security, the answer is like, oh, let's just train the users, and not been enough done to really, really shape the technology to make it fit.
Yeah, that's what I'm really passionate about, is trying to make security second nature behind the scenes. Like, they don't even know it's happening. I think that's so important. Yeah, I'd like to end just by hearing, what are you most excited about in your research now? What are you working on? What is your team working on?
So we've been spending a lot of time with security professionals, actually, and looking at their tasks. And part of this has been trying to explain to them how they could work more productively and cooperatively with users, and explain. But it's also been looking at their jobs and actually realizing that they often actually face quite unreasonable amounts of workload and pressure, and are often quite isolated, and they often end up in adversarial situations with all sorts of other people in an organization. And that's one of our key messages, is saying, if people in the organization are fighting each other, you are the good guys. You're on the same side. If you're fighting each other, you're just making the attacker's job easier, right?
Yeah.
And to really help towards more finding really different bits of expertise and capabilities that companies have, and helping that to support the security professionals. So both, getting them to extend, change their perspective a bit, but also looking at good practices companies have in other areas. I mean, you were talking about physical security, physical access control and so on. I mean, that's actually very close to just workplace safety type, design issues and techniques. And there is actually a lot of knowledge there on how to do that well. And if you bring that together, you can get this the IT security experts more help in finding good workable solutions.
That's a really fascinating point. I would love to read more about that as you guys begin to publish more on that topic. Thank you, Angela. It was so great talking with you. You bring such a unique perspective. I think the listeners are going to get so much out of this episode. So thank you again. And with that, I think we'll end today's session. If you like this episode, you can follow us for more on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.